Over the past few decades, Hollywood has churned out countless superhero movies, some better than others, but amidst all the superhero hype, I think people often forget just how many comic book characters that are popular today might have never even existed without Superman, the first official comic book superhero, the one that started everything and opened the door to an entirely new literary genre. Superman made his first appearance in 1938 in Action Comics #1, and over the next 9 decades, through comics, TV shows, movies, and even games, the character would establish itself as one of the most widely recognizable fictional characters of all time. And when it comes to feature films, 1977's Superman the movie is to this day considered one of the best comic book adaptations ever made, still seen by many as the ultimate blueprint for successfully bringing a superhero origin story to the screen. And combined with the impeccable casting of Christopher Reeve in the role, his movies, especially Superman 1 and 2, were always going to be a tough act to follow. Warner Brothers did try, though, in 2006 with Superman Returns, a sort of softly rebooted sequel to Reeves' first 2 Superman movies, starring Brandon Routh, an actor who kind of looked like Reeves but wasn't. And while I myself didn't flat out hate Superman Returns, it did have some creative issues, and Warner Brothers were ultimately disappointed with its box office receipts, which is why they canceled any plans for a potential sequel. Then, in 2013, following the success of Nolan's Batman trilogy, Warner Brothers released Zack Snyder's fully rebooted Superman movie, Man of Steel, this time starring Henry Cavill. And while Man of Steel was considered at least somewhat financially successful, and Henry Cavill was generally well received in the role, Warner Brothers studio heads were ultimately disappointed again, as at the time they were chasing Marvel's Avengers-level box office success, and they had hoped to see a movie like Man of Steel break $1 billion worldwide, which, of course, it didn't. So in a hasty and foolish attempt to try and quickly catch up with Disney's MCU, Warner appointed Zack Snyder to direct Batman v Superman, which also underperformed, and later, they also hired him to direct a Justice League movie which ended up being a whole saga in and of itself. But without dwelling on all of that too much, I'll just say that while I've always felt that Snyder's Superman had a pretty cool visual style and aesthetic, I think he took Superman in directions which didn't always stay true to his character, and at least some of Snyder's creative decisions were considered divisive amongst fans. Regardless, Snyder would eventually find himself outside of the DC franchise, and with James Gunn's appointment as co-CEO of DC Studios in 2022, Gunn then announced a complete franchise reboot, excluding any projects that his wife appeared in, and also announced that a new rebooted Superman movie was meant to launch his own version of the DC cinematic universe, which he now referred to as the DCU. And ever since Gunn's announcement, I've been a bit wary of him taking on a character like Superman, and it's not like the eventual trailers we got for this movie really eased my concerns either. Yes, I enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy and The Suicide Squad, but while Gunn's quirky goofball writing and directing style may work with ensemble superhero groups of misfits, Superman is a completely different vibe and needs a completely different directorial style and approach. Different than anything we've ever seen from Gunn, so obviously Superman was always going to be a big test for Gunn, because if he couldn't deliver a well-received Superman box office hit, his entire vision for his own DCU could be in jeopardy. Thankfully, I was able to catch an early screening of Superman, and I'm ready to talk about it in broad strokes without spoiling major plot points. And if you enjoy getting these type of early, exclusive reviews from an independent reviewer like myself, please make sure to like and subscribe. I do spend a lot of time on my videos, and any type of support you could give me would be amazing.
Do it.
James Gunn's Superman starts off with a series of titles filling us in on what's going on, kind of like a Star Wars movie. For 300 years there have been metahumans on Earth, Clark Kent arrived 30 years ago, and for the past 3 years he's been active as Superman. It also explains that Superman has just suffered his first defeat in a battle against a villain called the Hammer of Baravia. Crypto the dog then shows up and drags Superman into the Fortress of Solitude, where some robots help him heal by exposing him to the sun. We also get to see some kind of hologram greeting from his deceased Kryptonian parents, and yes, Bradley Cooper plays Jor-El in something of a cameo. Anyhow, after some him recharging, Superman returns to fight the Hammer of Baravia, but he's just not strong enough to overpower him. Very quickly, we learn that Lex Luthor is basically controlling the Hammer himself, that Luthor has an obsession with taking down Superman, and that he plans to leverage this apparent Superman defeat to his own benefit when it comes to public opinion. As we've also seen in the trailers, as Clark Kent, he also works at the Daily Planet with his colleagues Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, and although they hide it at work, Lois and Clark are already in a relationship, but it's kind of rocky at times, and yes, Lois is aware that Clark is also Superman. When Lois presses him on his unsolicited involvement in a military conflict between two countries that may have endangered his own people, Clark gets very upset and acts like an overly sensitive man-child, causing a rift between them. And without spoiling any major details here, throughout the movie, we learn more and more about the different layers of Lex Luthor's diabolical plan, and as his challenges get more difficult to overcome, Superman requires the assistance of what's referred to as the Justice Gang, which includes Guy Gardner's Green Lantern, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl. Throughout the movie, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and even Krypto have to keep bailing Superman out, and at some point we even run into Metamorpho. And in spite of a few rather predictable twists, I think you can all pretty much figure out the general direction of the story and how it ends. Now, I'm aware that there are some other YouTubers out there, even ones that I respect, that are very pleased with how this movie came out, but unfortunately, I have to say that I myself am quite disappointed with it. While I acknowledge that James Gunn has made an effort to be a little less quirky than usual here, and that Gunn is knowledgeable when it comes to the Superman comic book source material, I would also argue that he still makes some rather questionable creative choices here, several of which bothered me throughout the movie, with the main one being how Superman himself is presented. In addition to getting his butt kicked about every 2 minutes, Superman comes off as a goofy, angry, and whiny loser at times, and I really didn't like that. I know there have been a lot of different interpretations of the character throughout the years in various mediums, and some people may accept this specific version of Superman, but I just find it kind of annoying. And to be clear here, this isn't really the fault of actor David Cornsweet, who I thought was rather decent in the role. I think it's more the way his Superman was written and directed by Gunn that's really the issue here. One of the things I've always liked about Christopher Reeve's version of the character is that Superman always seemed classy, confident, competent, mature, and masculine. So basically, the exact opposite of what we get in this new version. And when Superman was exposed to kryptonite or any other forces that could overpower him, we the viewers could really feel how high the stakes were, versus in Gunn's movie, when he just seems rather weak for most of the time anyways, for some reason. Also, on that same note, I don't prefer seeing a Superman movie where every second other people need to come in and save him like he's some kind of damsel in distress, and that is a recurring theme here. Personally, I could have done with a more simple and focused Superman story, especially for his first outing in this new universe. A story that really lets him and his character shine, before introducing all these other secondary characters, which themselves made this movie more messy and more scattered than it needed to be. Acting-wise, Rachel Brosnahan was fine as Lois Lane too, but I think that because of how busy the movie is, you never really feel the importance of Lois's relationship with Superman, which hurts whatever payoffs to their relationship we see later in the movie. Nicholas Hoult is a good actor, and I think he's serviceable enough as Lex Luthor, but I also think Gunn made the character a bit too childish and over the top here, which I didn't prefer. If I had to mention a few bright spots in this movie, it would probably be Jimmy Olsen, whose character was finally done some justice here, and Mr. Terrific, who I did actually like, even though I think the plot relied on him a bit too much. Now, prior to this movie's release, there was a lot of discussion online on whether James Gunn's Superman would be considered woke or not, and after seeing it, I would say that the movie does have at least some agenda peddling, although it's woven in somewhat cleverly, especially in comparison to more recent MCU outings, which makes sense because James Gunn is a more skilled writer and director than a lot of those activists that are currently working at Disney. But that doesn't mean that I approve of Gunn's messaging. For starters, a Superman that never seems like he's truly in charge of any situation feels like another modern-day dig at the patriarchy, and honestly, I'm really tired of this trope. If all James Gunn wanted to do was to create a pushover Superman to fit with the times, maybe this really wasn't the right movie for him. After all, the character is called Superman, not Beta Man, and if you believe that I've simply misinterpreted Gunn's intentions, look no further than the character of Pa Kent, who literally cries every time we see him on screen, with his own wife then mentioning that he's a mush of a man. Not to mention that Gunn also presents Clark's parents as two stupid hillbillies for some reason. Another example in this movie where Gunn enforces this same agenda is that he hired an appealing actress to play Lois Lane, one that is indeed feminine in real life, only to always have her dressed like a dude throughout the entire movie. And no, I don't believe this is a coincidence, as we've already seen Gunn do something similar with Nebula in Guardians 3, so we know he's capable of it. And when it comes to Gunn's personal position on immigration, there is a slight hint of that within the movie, although I have to admit it's pretty mild. I think if he hadn't blabbed a bunch of nonsense about it in the press prior to the film's release, it probably would have been much less noticeable too. On the other hand, I think that one thing that was very noticeable, at least to me, was Gunn's preachiness when it comes to current geopolitical events. At some point in the movie, there's a country of poor, diverse people that's under threat from a Western colonizer country. And while it's true that these are fictional countries, the messaging here to me felt a bit heavy-handed and a bit too on the nose, especially in what's supposed to be an escapist movie. Overall, I would say that this movie has many issues, the biggest one being that James Gunn simply didn't understand the assignment. If this was an original IP he came up with, I guess it would have been a serviceable enough superhero movie, but as a Superman movie, I think it ultimately falls short, and I found myself annoyed in too many parts of it. Now, for those of you that are not aware of how I rate movies, anything below a 60 out of 100 is considered a failure, and if I had to give this movie a score, I suppose I would give it a 60 out of 100, which means that it just barely gets a passing grade, because if nothing else, it's at least somewhat competently made. And if you'd like to receive more exclusive early movie reviews from an independent reviewer like myself, please make sure to like and subscribe, as it would really help my channel. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day!
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.